So, a little bit to offer just kind of my own history here with wine. Um, and I know I alluded to it a little bit in the previous video, but just for the sake of transparency, for the sake of kind of understanding where my background is as it relates to wine, it might be helpful to know. So I'm not a sommelier, which that word you might hear around. I'm not a sommelier, which means wine steward. Um, I don't have any professional kind of certifications to my credit yet, I guess, for that matter. Excuse me. Um, but I have been involved with wine, both kind of like personally and professionally, for about 10 years. So I first kind of like really got into wine when I was managing a restaurant and wine bar. And prior to that, I was actually serving at the same restaurant and wine bar. And that's where I first started learning about wine because we would have wines come in from all over the world. We'd have wines that came in all from the Northwest, from California, from Idaho, and I just became so interested in it, right? And I became interested in wine not just for the effects of what wine drinking can do, because it is pleasurable and enjoyable, um, but also with wine there is kind of a unique um, attitude of like a sense of place almost, right? And I'll dive into this in one of the later videos today, but there is something to be said of like grapes growing in a particular place, and these grapes are growing in a particular way that all very well might lend itself to taste a certain way. Okay? Also, you get to learn about different countries by the type of grapes that they grow there, and whether that's New Zealand, whether that's Chile, whether that's France, whether that's South Africa, right? That Vinus vinifera, the wine grape, is grown all over the globe. Okay, so I first really got into wine when I eventually became a manager at this restaurant and wine bar, and I was in charge of primarily doing all of the wine buying. And each week I would change the wines on the menu. I would change wine flights on the menu, thinking of like what would be kind of interesting to go with various dishes, and how to kind of compare and contrast similar and different wines, and really really gratifying, really really enjoyable. And then after I left that manager job, I actually worked at a local wine and cheese shop that no longer exists, but kind of working more on the nuance side of selling bottles rather than just like offering recommendations on what goes well with what in the restaurant setting. And then I got involved in another place that is open in Moscow, and I actually am not currently involved with them, but out of the gates I was, and their little wine, beer, cheese, meat shop right next to the bagel shop. So I highly recommend going in and saying, hey, they're good people, and they have a really good wine selection, and I kind of helped at the very early stages of that. But kind of worth going in. And then now my current job over in Pullman, even as a craft cocktail bartender, I still deal with wine often. I answer wine questions, and I offer, again, recommendations as to what pairs well with what. And prior to all this, just as kind of like to, just to kind of, show that I've been there as well, is back in my undergrad. This is kind of a funny story, and then we'll move on to more serious topics after this. But back in my undergrad, I actually would have what I would call Bryce nights, which were I lived in this house with a couple of about 4 other guys, and all of them had partners, and I didn't. And so there would be times where in this big 3-story house in Kansas City, they would all be gone spending time with their partners, and I would be home alone. And so I would go and I would get a frozen pizza and usually a $5 bottle of wine that had a gold label on it, um, like from Australia, usually is where these gold labeled $5 wines are from. And I would go home and I would watch a movie and I would drink a bunch of the wine and I would eat most of the pizza. And I always joked with my friends that I always had the better nights than they did. And it's funny again to like start thinking about your history with alcohol, think about your history with like particular alcohols in general. And for me, I do have kind of a fun and interesting relationship with wine, both again professionally and personally. And so one day I do hope to either have some professional certificate to my name, whether that's sommelier. There's also various other organizations that aren't as known but still carry weight in the wine world that are on my radar. And so kind of bringing all of that, I do think I offer, again, a kind of a unique perspective to wine and to kind of being able to talk about wine, especially with those that are unfamiliar. And whether or not one's actually consumed wine is, again, a different question. I'm not, all too much pressing that at all. But I hope that the next couple videos, as we get more substance, as we actually get into more substance as it relates to wine, we'll be able to unpack kind of some of the distinctions, some of the clarifications, categories rather, not clarifications, some of the distinctions and categories that might be helpful as we get to learn and know a little bit more about wine.